The gleaming silver ship glided through Earth's blue skies, its polished surface catching the morning sun like a mirror. Inside, Ambassador Taiwan peered down at the sprawling city of New Seoul through his 4 pairs of eyes. His iridescent scales shifted colors as he moved, reflecting his inner mood of superiority and mild annoyance. "Primitive beings," he muttered, his long fingers tapping against the observation window. "Just another waste of the Confederation's time." His assistant Hannah stood quietly beside him, her transparent body pulsing with soft blue lights in agreement. Like most members of their species, they both viewed newly discovered civilizations as little more than children playing with toys. Earth had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago, barely a blink in galactic terms. As their ship descended toward the landing pad, Taiwan studied the city below. The gleaming towers and flying vehicles surprised him, though he kept his face carefully neutral. He had expected to see more primitive infrastructure, perhaps even some areas still using fossil fuels. Instead, clean energy collectors covered many buildings, and the air was remarkably clear for an industrial civilization. "At least they've managed basic environmental protection," he commented to Hannah. "Though I suppose even the simplest species eventually learn not to poison their own nest." Hannah's body flickered with patterns of light, their species' way of showing amusement. The reports suggest they achieved this only recently. Much of their planet was quite polluted until about 50 years ago. The ship touched down with perfect precision on a circular landing pad atop one of the taller buildings. Taiwan straightened his ceremonial robes, making sure the symbols of his diplomatic rank were clearly visible. First impressions were important, even with primitive species. "Remember," he told Hannah, "speak slowly and use simple terms. We don't want to overwhelm them with concepts they can't understand." The ship's main door opened with a soft hiss, extending a ramp to the landing pad. Taiwan expected to see humans dressed in their traditional cultural garments, perhaps those business suits their leaders seemed fond of. Instead, he found himself facing a delegation wearing sleek uniforms that seemed to shift colors like his own scales. Holographic displays floated around their wrists and shoulders, showing streams of data he couldn't quite read from this distance. At their head stood Director Jin Woo Park, and Taiwan felt his first moment of genuine surprise. He had studied human leadership styles and expected either aggressive dominance or nervous deference. The woman before him showed neither. She stood with perfect poise, her presence somehow filling the space around her without any obvious display of authority. "Ambassador Taiwan," she said, her universal translator perfectly matching his language's formal tones, "Earth welcomes you and your delegation. We are honored to join the greater galactic community." As they exchanged the traditional diplomatic greetings, Taiwan found his attention drawn to the way the humans moved. There was something about their motions that made his scales want to flatten in warning. They were so efficient. No wasted energy, no excessive gestures. Each movement seemed purposeful, almost like. He pushed the thought away. He was being ridiculous. Humans were classified as a Category 3 civilization, barely above industrial level. Their biological profile showed them to be medium-strength omnivores, nothing particularly special about them at all. "Please follow me," Director Park said, gesturing toward a nearby door. "We've prepared a full presentation on Earth's current status and our hopes for cooperation with the Confederation." As they walked, Taiwan noticed more details that didn't quite fit his expectations. The human security personnel moved with an unsettling grace, their eyes constantly scanning the area in patterns that seemed almost tactical. The other staff members showed similar traits, quick, precise movements that reminded him of something he couldn't quite place. Hannah brushed one of her sensory tendrils against his arm, their species' way of sharing private thoughts. "They seem more advanced than our reports indicated," she transmitted. "Surface-level technology only," he sent back. "Any species can build shiny buildings and make fancy uniforms. Let's see their actual capabilities before we jump to conclusions." Yet as they entered the building and began their formal meetings, that nagging feeling wouldn't leave him. Something about these humans wasn't matching their classification. The way they moved, the quick intelligence in their eyes, the subtle signs of strength in their seemingly fragile bodies, it all added up to something he wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. We have prepared detailed reports on our industrial capacity, scientific achievements, and cultural development, Director Park was saying, bringing up elaborate holographic displays with a casual gesture. We believe Earth has much to offer the Confederation, and we're eager to learn from our more experienced galactic neighbors. Taiwan nodded politely, but his mind was racing. The reports had said humans were adaptable, yes, but this level of technological integration, this efficiency of movement and thought. He pushed his concerns aside again. They were just another primitive species, weren't they? As the first day of diplomatic contact continued, he kept telling himself that. But deep inside, where his diplomatic training couldn't quite reach, a small voice was warning him that he, and perhaps the entire Confederation, might be making a very serious mistake in underestimating these humans. The morning sun cast long shadows across New Seoul's agricultural district as Director Jinwoo led the alien delegation through the towering vertical farms. Massive glass and metal structures reached toward the sky, their sides covered in countless rows of growing plants. Water systems sparkled as they delivered precise amounts of nutrients to each level. Our farms feed millions of people, Jinwoo explained, her voice filled with quiet pride. Each tower produces as much food as 10,000 acres of traditional farmland. Taiwan nodded politely, but inside he was struggling not to show his amusement. How primitive these humans were, still growing their food from actual plants. In the Confederation, they had moved beyond such basic methods centuries ago. Their matter synthesizers could produce any food instantly, perfectly crafted at the molecular level. Most impressive, he said, not quite hiding the condescension in his voice. Though perhaps someday you'll advance to more efficient methods. Hana moved silently beside him, her translucent form shimmering as she recorded everything with her neural systems. Her body pulsed with soft lights as she documented the farming techniques, though Taiwan could tell she shared his dismissive attitude. They continued their tour, passing by a construction site where workers were building yet another farming tower. Humans in powered exoskeletons moved heavy materials, while others operated floating platforms to work on higher levels. Taiwan had to admit the sight was somewhat impressive, even if their technology was centuries behind Confederation standards. Your construction methods are interesting, he said, trying to sound diplomatic, though surely automated systems would be more efficient. Jinwoo smiled, a gesture Taiwan was still trying to interpret correctly. We find that human oversight helps prevent accidents and allows for quick adaptation to unexpected problems. Speaking of which, her words were cut off by a sudden sharp crack from above. One of the main support beams had broken free from its mounting, plummeting toward a group of workers below. Taiwan's scales rippled in alarm. At that speed, the beam would surely crush anyone it hit. But before he could even finish that thought, something extraordinary happened. A human worker in an exosuit spun around, assessed the situation, and moved with impossible speed. The worker's suit enhanced their strength, yes, but the reaction time was all human. In less than a second, they had calculated the beam's trajectory, moved into position, and caught the massive metal beam. The worker's legs bent slightly under the impact, but they held firm. The beam, which must have weighed several tons, was safely lowered to the ground. Other workers rushed to secure it properly. Remarkable reaction time, Hannah whispered to Taiwan, her body pulsing with patterns that showed genuine amazement. I've never seen anything quite like it. Taiwan waved his hand dismissively, though his voice wasn't quite as confident as before. Just basic machine assistance. The exosuit did all the work. But he knew that wasn't entirely true. The suit had provided the strength, yes, but the speed of reaction, the split-second decision-making, the precise movements, those had all come from the human operator. According to their scientific briefings, Humans should not have been capable of such quick responses. Is everyone all right? Jin Woo called out, showing genuine concern for the workers. All good, Director. The worker who had caught the beam called back, already helping to secure it properly. Just another day at the office. The casual way they dismissed such an impressive feat bothered Taiwan even more than the feat itself. Were such reactions normal for humans? Had their research teams somehow missed this capability? They continued the tour, but Taiwan found himself paying much closer attention to the humans around them. He noticed things he had overlooked before. The constant awareness of their surroundings, the quick adjustments they made to avoid collisions, the way they seemed to anticipate problems before they happened. Perhaps you'd like to see our food processing facilities next, Jin Woo suggested, seemingly unaware of his internal struggle. While we still grow our food naturally, our preparation methods might interest you. Yes, of course. Taiwan agreed automatically, though his mind was elsewhere. He found himself wondering what other capabilities these humans might be hiding. Their official classification as a Category 3 civilization had seemed so certain when he'd reviewed it before this mission. Now, watching them work, seeing their reactions and capabilities, he wasn't so sure. Hana moved closer to him, her body flickering with private communication patterns. Should we update our assessment protocols? She asked silently. Not yet, he replied in the same manner. But keep recording everything. There's more to these humans than our reports indicated. As they walked toward the processing facility, Taiwan couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important about these supposedly primitive beings. The incident with the beam had cracked his certainty about human capabilities, and he had a growing suspicion that there would be more surprises to come. The emergency alarms blared through Earth's Defense Command Center as red lights flashed across the walls. Taiwan rushed into the meeting room alongside other officials, his scales shifting to a pale blue color that reflected his anxiety. The Rion Empire's attack on the Mars colony had caught everyone by surprise. Everyone except the humans, it seemed. Colonel Sun Li stood at the center of the room, her face illuminated by the massive holographic display showing the battle around Mars. Red dots marked Rion ships, while blue indicators showed Earth's vessels racing to engage them. Taiwan expected to see fear or at least concern on the colonel's face. Instead, he saw something that made his scales ripple. She was smiling. The Rion think they can bully their way into our solar system. Sun Mi's voice carried across the room with absolute confidence. They're about to learn why that's a bad idea. All ships, execute Operation Thunderbolt. Taiwan watched the holographic display in growing disbelief. Earth's ships were tiny compared to the Rion battlecruisers, but they moved with impossible speed and precision. He had studied human spacecraft capabilities before his diplomatic mission. These maneuvers should have been far beyond their limits. Those acceleration forces, he whispered to Hana, who stood beside him recording everything. The pilots should be unconscious or dead. A human ship suddenly spun 180 degrees while maintaining its forward momentum, firing its main weapons straight into a Rion vessel's engines. The larger ship exploded, scattering debris across space. 3 more human vessels darted through the explosion, using the debris field as cover to launch attacks on other targets. Status report, Sun Li commanded, her eyes never leaving the display. All ships reporting optimal performance. A young officer replied. Pilots are handling the high-G maneuvers without issues. The Rion don't know how to counter our attack patterns. Taiwan felt his diplomatic composure slipping. This wasn't possible. He had read all the reports about human physiology. Their bodies were supposed to be fragile, barely able to handle the stresses of basic space travel. Yet here they were, pulling maneuvers that would turn most species to paste. Colonel Li, he said, trying to keep his voice steady, perhaps we should consider opening diplomatic channels with the Rion. The Confederation could mediate. Sun Mi turned to face him, and Taiwan suddenly understood why ancient humans had painted predators in their art. Her smile hadn't changed, but now he could see the hunter behind it. With all due respect, Ambassador, she said. We don't need meditation. We need to show the Realm that attacking human colonies has consequences. On the display, more human ships joined the battle. They moved in patterns that seemed chaos at first, but Taiwan's trained diplomatic eye began to see the strategy. They were herding the Realm ships, using their superior maneuverability to force the larger vessels into vulnerable positions. "Ma'am," another officer called out. "The Realm flagship is attempting to gather their forces for a concentrated strike." "Perfect," Sun Mai replied. "Just as planned. Launch Phase 2. Taiwan watched in amazement as dozens of smaller craft emerged from hidden positions around Mars. They accelerated at speeds that should have been lethal, swarming around the Realm ships like angry insects. The larger vessels tried to track them with their weapons, but the human pilots moved too quickly, too unpredictably. "How are they surviving these maneuvers?" he asked Hannah, no longer caring if the humans heard his confusion. "Our pilots train for this," Sun Mai answered instead, her eyes still fixed on the battle. "Human bodies are remarkably adaptable. What other species consider lethal G-forces, we view as an acceptable challenge to overcome." The battle continued to unfold, and with each passing minute, Taiwan's understanding of humanity shifted. These weren't the primitive beings he had expected to find. They were something else entirely, something that perhaps the galaxy wasn't ready for. "Realm forces are beginning to retreat," an officer announced. "Their flagship has taken heavy damage to its drive systems." "Let them go," Sun Mai ordered. "They've learned their lesson for today. But make sure they know, this was just a warning. If they return, we won't be so gentle." As the red dots on the display began to fade, showing the Realm ships fleeing the solar system, Taiwan realized his diplomatic mission had just become much more complicated. He would need to send an urgent message to the Confederation. Their assessment of humanity needed serious revision. "I trust this demonstrates that humanity can defend its interests?" Sun Mai asked him directly, her predator's smile still in place. Taiwan could only nod, his scales now showing patterns of respect and just a touch of fear. The humans hadn't just survived their first interstellar battle, they had dominated it. And somehow, he suspected this was only the beginning of their surprises. The Terran Historical Institute stood tall against the evening sky, its ancient stone architecture a stark contrast to the modern buildings around it. Inside his office, Dr. Kita Yang watched with amusement as Ambassador Taiwan studied the artifacts displayed on the walls: spears, arrows, and primitive tools that told the story of humanity's past. "Ambassador, what do you see when you look at these weapons?" Kita asked, leaning back in his chair. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his desk, where holographic projectors waited quietly. Taiwan's scales shifted through shades of blue as he considered the question. "Primitive hunting tools. Evidence of your species' violent origins." He paused, then added, "Though after witnessing the battle at Mars, I admit I may need to revise some of my assumptions about humans." Keita chuckled, the sound making Taiwan's scales ripple with uncertainty. "You don't understand what humans are, do you?" He pressed a button, and the holographic projectors sprang to life. Above his desk, images formed of ancient humans chasing prey across vast grasslands. "Look carefully," Kita said, zooming in on the running humans. "Notice how they move. Notice their breathing, their posture, their persistence. We didn't evolve to be the strongest creatures on our planet. We didn't need to be." The hologram shifted, showing humans pursuing a large deer-like creature under the hot sun. Hour after hour passed in accelerated time, the humans never stopping, never giving up. "We evolved as pursuit predators," Ketat explained, his voice filled with quiet pride. "While other predators relied on ambush or short bursts of speed, we developed something far more terrifying: endurance." Taiwan watched as the holographic hunters continued their relentless chase. But surely the prey could outrun you. Initially, yes, they would sprint away, thinking they had escaped. Kita adjusted the display, showing the prey animals' increasing exhaustion. But we would follow. Hour after hour, day after day if necessary. We could jog for days, Ambassador, days, while our prey had to rest, had to cool down. We just kept coming. The ambassador's scales paled to an almost white color as the implications sank in. His own species, like most in the Confederation, had evolved for efficiency. They used energy sparingly, resting whenever possible. The idea of continuing physical activity for days was almost incomprehensible. But that's not all. Kita continued, changing the hologram to show human adaptation across different environments. We can regulate our body temperature through sweating, something rare in the galaxy. We can heal from injuries that would kill most species. Our bodies adapt to almost any environment. The display showed humans surviving in frozen wastelands, scorching deserts, high mountains, and deep oceans. Most species specialize. Kita explained. They become perfect for one environment. We adapt to them all. Taiwan sank into his chair, his diplomatic composure slipping. The battle at Mars, he said quietly, the G-forces the pilots endured, are nothing compared to what we can handle with proper training. Kita finished. Your scientists classified us based on our current strength, speed, and technology. But they missed something fundamental about humans. We never stop pushing our limits. He brought up new holograms, showing human athletic achievements, space exploration, and technological advancement. Every barrier we encounter, we overcome. Every limit we find, we push past it. It's not just physical, it's written into our psychology. We see impossible things as challenges to overcome. The ambassador's scales now showed patterns of deep concern. The Confederation's assessment of humanity was based on incomplete data, he admitted. We saw your technological level and made assumptions. A common mistake, Kita said kindly. Most species look at us and see what they expect to see. A young, relatively weak civilization. They don't realize they're looking at something unique in the galaxy, a species that evolved to never give up, never stop pursuing its goals. He stood and walked to one of the displays, picking up an ancient spear. This isn't just a primitive weapon, Ambassador. It's evidence of our nature. When we couldn't run fast enough, we made tools to extend our reach. When we couldn't fly, we built machines to carry us to the stars. Whatever we lack naturally, we create through innovation and sheer determination. Taiwan watched as Kita returned to his desk, his scales now showing patterns that humans might have interpreted as fear, but were closer to profound respect. The Rayon Empire made a serious mistake, he said. Yes, Kita agreed. They assumed, as most do, that humans would be easy prey. Instead, they've awakened something they don't understand. Humanity's instinct to pursue, to endure, to overcome. They'll learn, as others have throughout our history, that challenging humans is like being chased by death itself. We don't stop. We don't tire. We simply keep coming until we achieve our goal. As the sun set outside, casting the office in deepening shadows, Taiwan realized he needed to send an urgent message to the Confederation. Humanity wasn't just another species to be cataloged and monitored. They were something the galaxy had never seen before, and perhaps wasn't ready to face. Thank you, Doctor, he said, rising to leave. You've given me much to think about. Keita smiled, and for a moment, Taiwan saw in that expression the same predatory look he'd noticed in Colonel Sunmei during the battle. That's another thing about humans, Ambassador. We're always happy to teach, even if the lessons might be uncomfortable for those learning them. Red emergency lights flashed across Earth's Orbital Defense Command as status screens showed the approaching Rayon fleet. Hundreds of enemy ships had jumped into the system, surrounding Earth's defense stations in a sphere of deadly intent. The air was thick with tension, but not fear. At least not from the humans. Taiwan stood at the back of the command center, his scales shifting through shades of gray as he watched Commander Yumi Cho direct Earth's defense forces. Dark circles marked her eyes, and her uniform showed signs of 3 days of continuous wear. Yet her voice remained steady and clear as she issued commands. Station 7 reports hull breach in sectors 3 through 5. An officer called out, "Life support is failing. Evacuate non-essential personnel." He ordered without hesitation. Essential crew, switch to pressure suits and maintain positions. She turned to another screen, already focused on the next crisis. Deploy defense pattern Delta to cover the evacuation. Taiwan watched in disbelief as the crew on Station 7 continued their duties in near-vacuum conditions, protected only by their suits. In the Confederation, such an environment would have been considered too hostile for continued operation. Yet these humans worked on, their efficiency barely affected by the deadly conditions. "How are they doing this?" he whispered to Hannah, whose transparent form pulsed with patterns of amazement. "They haven't slept. They're working in vacuum, under extreme stress. Their endurance exceeds all known parameters." Hannah replied, her lights flickering rapidly as she recorded everything. Even their cognitive functions remained sharp under conditions that would incapacitate most species. A massive explosion rocked the command center as a Rion battlecruiser scored a direct hit on one of the defensive platforms. Taiwan's scales flattened in alarm, but the humans barely seemed to notice. They adjusted their stance automatically, continuing their work without missing a beat. "Commander," a young lieutenant called out, "Station 3 reports their main reactor is critical. They're looking at total failure in 10 minutes. He's expression didn't change as she processed this new crisis. "Order them to initiate Protocol Omega. We're not letting that station fall into Rion hands." Taiwan moved closer to her station, his diplomatic training warring with his growing concern. "Commander, your people have been at battle stations for 3 days straight. Surely you need rest, need to rotate crews." She turned to look at him, and he saw in her eyes the same predatory focus he'd come to recognize in humans under stress. "Ambassador, with all due respect, you don't understand what humans are capable of. We'll rest when the job is done." As if to emphasize her point, another alarm blared through the command center. The main life support system had failed, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Without a word, the entire crew pulled on pressure suits and oxygen masks, continuing their work as frost began forming on the consoles. Engineering reports they need 15 minutes to restore life support, an officer reported through his mask. "They have 10, he replied calmly, her own voice slightly muffled by her mask. "Tell them to work faster." Hannah moved closer to Taiwan, her form shifting with concern. "Their internal temperature is dropping, but their performance isn't degrading." "How is this possible?" Before he could respond, a massive explosion lit up the main view screen. Station 3 had initiated Protocol Omega, detonating its reactor just as a group of Rayon ships attempted to board it. The explosion caught 3 enemy cruisers in its blast, turning them into expanding clouds of debris. "Excellent timing," he commented, as if discussing the weather. "Use that debris field to mask our counterattack. All ships in Sector 4, execute attack pattern Sigma." Taiwan watched as human ships darted through the debris, using it as cover to launch devastating attacks on the Rion fleet. The pilots showed the same impossible endurance as the command crew, pulling maneuvers that should have been fatal after days of continuous combat. "Life support restored," someone announced. The temperature began to rise, but no one removed their suits. They had learned to expect the unexpected, to be ready for anything. "Commander," Taiwan said softly, "I owe humanity an apology. We severely underestimated your species." He smiled behind her mask, though her eyes never left the tactical display. "That's a common mistake, Ambassador. Everyone underestimates us, right up until they realize what we really are." She paused as another series of explosions marked successful hits on Rayon ships. "We're not just survivors. We're hunters who have learned to turn space itself into our hunting ground." As if to prove her point, the tactical display showed the Rion fleet beginning to break formation. Their perfectly planned assault was falling apart in the face of humanity's relentless defense. The hunters had become the hunted, and they were only now realizing their mistake. "Send word to all stations," he ordered, her voice carrying the weight of inevitable victory. "The enemy is falling back. Press the advantage. Show them what happens when they threaten Earth." Taiwan's scales shifted to show deep respect as he watched humanity demonstrate why they were perhaps the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they were the strongest or most advanced, but because they simply refused to accept defeat, refused to stop, refused to break. No matter the conditions, no matter the odds. The battle raged on, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. The Rion had made the fatal mistake of assuming human limitations matched those of other species. They were learning, as Taiwan had, that humans didn't have limitations. They had challenges to overcome, and they would never stop until they overcame them. The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Confederation glowed with soft blue light as hundreds of alien representatives gathered for an emergency session. Taiwan stood at the center platform, his scales now showing confidence rather than their usual diplomatic restraint. Behind him, massive holographic displays filled the air, ready to show the evidence he had gathered. "Honored Council," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, "I come before you today to correct a terrible mistake, one that we, the Confederation, have made in our assessment of humanity." The chamber filled with murmurs as representatives of 1,000 worlds shifted in their seats. Many had dismissed his urgent request for this session as overblown concern about a primitive species. Now, seeing his unusual demeanor, they began to pay attention. "We classified humans as a Category 3 civilization," Taiwan continued, activating the first hologram. "We saw their technology level, their limited space presence, their seemingly fragile bodies, and we made assumptions. Those assumptions were wrong." The hologram showed footage from the battle at Earth's orbital stations. Human crews working in vacuum, continuing their duties even as their station's atmosphere vented into space. Pilots pulling maneuvers that should have turned their brains to jelly. Engineers repairing critical systems under conditions that would kill most species instantly. "Look at them," Taiwan urged, his voice filled with a mix of awe and concern. "They aren't merely surviving on what we classified as a death world. They've mastered it. And now they're mastering space itself." New images appeared. Humans working in the crushing pressures of deep-sea stations, surviving in the killing cold of Antarctic bases, thriving in the scorching heat of desert research posts. Their adaptability exceeds anything we've encountered before. Where other species specialize, humans generalize. Where we evolve for efficiency, they evolve for endurance. The Council's leader, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline matrix, spoke up. "Ambassador, surely you exaggerate. Their physical capabilities are well documented." "Are they?" Taiwan challenged, bringing up more footage. "Watch this." The display showed human ships during the Mars defense, performing maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. Their pilots endured forces that would render our best unconscious. Their crews fought for days without rest, and they did it while innovating new tactics, adapting their strategies in real time. The chamber erupted in discussion as council members debated these revelations. Some argued for immediately raising humanity's threat classification. Others insisted this had to be some sort of trick or technological assistance. "It's not technology," Taiwan declared, silencing the debate. "It's their fundamental nature. Humans evolved as pursuit predators. They can track prey for days, running until their target collapses from exhaustion. They've applied this same relentless determination to everything they do." He showed more footage, this time of human scientific advancement. "Look at their progress rate. While we perfect a technology before moving on, they iterate rapidly, constantly improving, never satisfied. In the time it takes us to optimize one solution, they've tried and adapted dozens." The leader's crystal matrix pulsed with concern. "You suggest we should fear them?" "No," Taiwan replied firmly. I suggest we should understand them. The Rayon Empire made the mistake of viewing humans as weak. They launched what they thought would be an easy conquest. He paused, letting his next words carry full weight. That mistake has cost them nearly a third of their fleet. New holograms showed the current situation around Mars. Human ships hunted Rayon vessels through the asteroid belt, using tactics that no conventional military would even consider. They turned the very environment, the vacuum, radiation, and extreme conditions that should have limited them, into weapons. Humanity doesn't just overcome challenges, Taiwan explained. They actively seek them out. Every barrier we think will stop them becomes a puzzle for them to solve. Every limitation we assume they have becomes a boundary for them to break. The council chamber had grown silent now, every representative focused intently on the evidence before them. They watched as another Rayon battlecruiser fell to human tactics, its crew never understanding how such a primitive species had defeated their superior technology. I propose an immediate revision of humanity's classification, Taiwan declared. Not because they are a threat, but because our current understanding puts both them and us at risk. We must approach them as equals, learn from their unique capabilities, and ensure that no other species makes the mistake of underestimating them. He showed one final piece of footage, a human child learning to walk. The infant fell repeatedly, but kept getting up, kept trying, never giving up until it mastered the skill. This is humanity's true power, not their technology, not their weapons, but their unshakable determination to overcome any challenge they face. The leader's crystal matrix glowed brightly as it considered Taiwan's words. You have given us much to consider, Ambassador. The Council will evaluate your evidence and revise our policies accordingly. As the session ended and representatives filed out, still discussing what they'd learned, Taiwan knew his message had hit home. The galaxy was about to change its view of humanity, and not a moment too soon. Because one thing had become clear to him. Humanity wasn't going to wait for the galaxy to understand them. They were going to keep pushing forward, keep advancing, keep overcoming every obstacle in their path. The only question was whether the rest of the galaxy would be wise enough to work with them, rather than stand in their way. Sunlight streamed through the vast crystal windows of the Confederation Peace Hall, casting rainbow patterns across the gathered delegates. The formal surrender of the Rayon Empire had just been signed, marking the end of their disastrous attempt to conquer humanity. Taiwan watched from his position near the Earth delegation, his scales shimmering with satisfaction as he observed this historic moment. Director Jinwoo stood tall among the assembled dignitaries, her presence commanding respect from species across the galaxy. The same quiet strength he had initially dismissed as primitive now drew admiring glances from even the most ancient civilization's representatives. The Galactic Confederation hereby recognizes Earth as a major power, the Council leader announced, its crystalline form glowing brightly. Their demonstrated capabilities and unique attributes make them essential partners in our shared future. Taiwan remembered his first arrival on Earth, barely 6 months ago. How foolish he had been, looking down at the primitive world with its simple inhabitants. Now, watching human diplomats confidently discussing trade agreements and cultural exchanges with ancient spacefaring races, he could hardly believe his own past arrogance. I admit, I thought you were weak, he said quietly to Jinwoo as they watched various species mingling after the ceremony. I've never been so glad to be wrong in all my diplomatic career. Jinwoo's smile had become familiar to him over the months, no longer the mysterious gesture it had once been. Perhaps strength isn't always about having the toughest armor or the biggest weapons, she replied thoughtfully. Sometimes it's about never giving up, no matter the odds. Across the hall, Commander Yoon-hee was explaining human battle tactics to an amazed group of military attaches. The Rayon representatives, now reduced to a minor power, watched from the sidelines with barely concealed shame. You know what truly convinced me about humanity's potential? Taiwan asked, watching the various interactions around them. It wasn't your victory over the Rayon. It was how you handled the victory. Jinwu raised an eyebrow, inviting him to continue. You could have demanded their complete surrender, stripped them of their colonies, reduced them to nothing, he explained. Instead, you offered fair terms, helped rebuild what was destroyed, and even shared medical technology to help their wounded. Crushing an enemy completely only creates future enemies, Jinwu said. We learned that from our own history. Better to turn opponents into allies when possible. The ceremony continued around them as more agreements were signed, more alliances formed. Humanity was wasting no time in establishing their place in the galactic community. Already, their innovative approaches to old problems had caught the attention of multiple species. The Council has asked me to remain as permanent ambassador to Earth, Ta-1 revealed. They believe my unique perspective on humanity's capabilities will be valuable. Jinwu's smile widened. And what perspective is that? That humanity isn't just another species joining the galactic community. You're something entirely new. He gestured to where human scientists were eagerly discussing theories with alien researchers. You combine physical capabilities we thought impossible with an innovative spirit we've never seen before. You treat obstacles as challenges to overcome rather than limits to accept. A small commotion drew their attention. A group of human children, part of a cultural exchange program, had entered the hall. They moved with natural curiosity among the alien delegates, asking questions that made ancient beings pause and reconsider their assumptions. That's our real strength, Jinwu said, watching the children. Not our endurance or our adaptability, but our endless curiosity, our desire to learn, to understand, to improve. As the day drew to a close, Ta-1 found himself on an observation deck, looking down at Earth. The blue planet spun peacefully below, giving no hint of the remarkable species it had produced. Ships from dozens of worlds moved through orbit, establishing trade routes and diplomatic connections with humanity's homeworld. The galaxy isn't ready for what humanity will achieve, he murmured to himself, his scales showing patterns of anticipation and wonder. No one ever is, Jinwu said, joining him at the window. That's what makes it interesting. Together, they watched as the sun set over Earth, casting the planet in golden light. Humanity's journey to the stars was just beginning, and Ta-1 knew he would have a front-row seat to whatever amazing developments came next. The species he had once dismissed as primitive was about to reshape the galaxy, not through force or conquest, but through their unending determination to push beyond every limit, to overcome every challenge, to reach ever higher. The galaxy might not be ready, but it would adapt. It would have to. Humanity had arrived on the cosmic stage, and they had no intention of playing by anyone else's rules.